You are being essentially suckered into a message that you are unwillingly consuming in this weird exchange where somebody wants to control your mind and you're playing along. I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I uncover criminal conspiracies. And when I find a paper trail and I find evidence that allows me to predict where a pandemic that never happened is going to come, that's not a theory. There is no question that by 2015, we had actually seen a joint US-Chinese publication that anticipated the variations that are now SARS coronavirus 2. When they planned a global pandemic preparedness exercise, which had to be done by September 2020, when they planned that, my assertion is that was an act of war by a corporate industrial complex that decided that the governments that they had acquired through influence, through lobbying, through everything else, wasn't playing ball anymore, and they needed to assert power over all of them. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at who's been the winners, you can't point to a country that's been the winners, but you can point to corporations that have been the winners. And if you really want to know probably who funded the whole exercise, there's probably a pretty good short list to start with.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is David Martin, the American author, professor, and researcher. Your company, MCAM, has provided research and advice to over 160 countries, and you personally have served as an advisor to the World Bank and many national governments. You star in the feature-length documentary film Plandemic, that on August 18th was live-streamed on London Real's digital freedom platform to nearly 2 million unique viewers, breaking the record for the largest live broadcast of a documentary film in human history. In the movie, you reveal the elaborate web of deception involved in what you describe as the biological weaponization of COVID-19 across governments, corporations, and regulators. By following the money, you expose in detail the major conflicts of interest of the very people that are managing this crisis. David, welcome to London Real.
Brian, it is an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Look, it's great to have you. Before we get started, I just want to announce to everybody that we are streaming now on our new digital freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and available exclusively on our website at freedomplatform.tv. Can everyone watching now please share this link via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels? Let me repeat that. Can everyone watching please share this link now via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels? This is important. Simply ask your friends and family to give us 15 minutes, and then they can decide. David, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anyone in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at freedomplatform.tv/Martin, thanks to the generous donations of over 38,000 people around the world that we affectionately call the London Real Army. For anybody wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom Platform, they can visit freedomplatform.tv/give to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. Here at London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And David, I'm excited to have you here today. I know you've got some breaking news, really, concerning Moderna, one of the pharmaceutical companies that's working on a vaccine in America. But before we get started, I got to ask you a dying question. I had Mikki Willis, the director of Plandemic, on a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to know, did at any point Mikki pull you aside and say, by the way, David, your whole life's going to change after this movie is done? Did he ever tell you that?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Brian. He said that to me when we were shooting the film. And then at dinner, probably 7 or 8 people in his kind of orbit came up and said, your life is going to change. And the funny thing is, they're right, but in the wrong way. My life changed in the following way. I have, as you know, outed white-collar crime and tax fraud and counterproliferation issues for the last 25 years. And usually at the end of those outings, I receive some of the worst treatment from humanity that I've ever received. On a massive contrast, and props to Mikki, props to his team, props to Matt Belair, who put me in touch with Mikki at the beginning, and all the amazing people who advocated for the Plandemic to be a full feature-length production. Not only did we not have that response, Brian, but I got thousands and thousands of emails, messages, and everything else from the very best of humanity. The people who, like you, are the Freedom Platform Army, the people who actually care. And I will tell you that my wife, Kim, and I have been overwhelmed with generosity, with love, with kindness, with support, with people who are actually advocating for the future of humanity. And much to my surprise, and I know to many of our surprise, people couldn't take issue with the substance of the film because it happened to have the inconvenience of being true.
That's a fascinating description of your life the past couple weeks. I do know some of that because, because of the London Real Army, we get a lot of that love on a regular basis. And I won't lie, David, it's what keeps me coming to work every day is getting that tremendous amount of feedback when you're getting a 1-2 combination from the mainstream media and social platforms and governments and whatever else. So yeah, that vibe is definitely there. And it's great to hear that people are giving you that. You said that usually when you out these white-collar criminals, you get a lot of negativity on the back of that. That was kind of surprising. Really?
Well, so here's the thing. I don't know if many people are familiar, but the late 90s and early 2000s became kind of a free-for-all with tax evasion. The British Isles very famously created all kinds of tax havens where people could put their technologies or their patents or their copyrights or their trademarks, and they do these creative, what the European Union called revenue sharing base erosion programs, where essentially people would offshore assets and create tax havens. And through a lot of illegal activities, we broke for the US Treasury what was at the time estimated to be the second largest tax fraud in US history. And when you take big corporations, and I mean the world's largest, not the S&P 500, the top of the S&P 500, when you take those corporations on, you have no clue how far-reaching their influence is into banks, into politics, into all kinds of other places. And seriously, they made about 5 years of our collective corporate life a living hell. It was unbelievable.
Wow. Wow. Well, you have a unique insight into what that's all about. And so perhaps we can lean on a little bit of that when we put some of these things into context because, that's eye-opening to a lot of people. And let's be honest, David, what you do is quite eye-opening. And the film kind of really sheds a little bit of a light into your daily practices and what you built up the last 20 years. And I know we even overlapped a little bit in the city of London here for 6 or 7 years. We probably walked the same streets because you were in the financial industry as well. And so you have really unique insights. And like you said, I got to see the film before everybody else a few days before, and I had seen the original 26-minute piece. And myself and my strategy officer watched it, and we were like, oh, wow. They're going full bulletproof on this. And so it was fascinating to see how it was really following this paper trail and how Mikki did it so well graphically to literally show you those documents backed up with you talking about it. So again, if someone hasn't seen the movie, I don't know where you've been the last couple of weeks, but there's a copy on our website and it's out there as well. So watch it because we're going to be talking quite a lot about it today. Maybe I want to jump right into this stuff about Moderna because again, it's really breaking news if you understand why it's so important, and we want to try to shine some light on that to get as many people to understand this as possible. But maybe you can break it down for people that have seen the film and not see the film. What's going on with Moderna, and put it in layman's terms to as much as you can, and maybe even start with the bigger picture as in what is Moderna, the history of, what are they trying to accomplish, and what we need to really look out for?
Well, so let's start with the headline. If on March 28th, 2019, and let's get that date burned into our consciousness. If on March 28th, 2019, the following sentence was written in a patent application, quote, because of a concern for reemergence or a deliberate release of SARS coronavirus, vaccine development was initiated. That sentence was written into a patent application on March the 28th, 2019. And you heard what I said. Vaccine development was, past tense, was initiated. So that means before March 28th, 2019, a deliberate release of SARS coronavirus was not only contemplated, but Moderna wrote it into their patent applications.
Wow.
Just let that chilling fact of what I just said sink in. Right? This is not a company that was operating in the conjecture theoretical world. This was not a company that was in the middle of this anonymous R&D program that was just happenstance to be running along looking at coronavirus. This was a patent application that had first been submitted in 2015. And the United States Patent Office had rejected it. You heard what I just said. They rejected the application, not once or twice. Over and over and over again, they rejected this patent application. But on March the 28th, 2019, suddenly a SARS beta coronavirus specific vaccine, and specifically not just SARS beta coronavirus, specifically the S1 spike protein, the thing that was allegedly novelly modified in December of 2019 in a bat cave in China, that was specifically referenced in March 2019. Now, keep in mind, and Brian, you know this, the company went public in 2018. This patent application was written March 28th, 2019, which means around the time of the IPO, it is reasonable to assume that somebody knew that there was going to be are you ready for this? Their words, not mine, reemergence or deliberate release of a beta coronavirus.
Yeah, wow, is all I have to say to that.
And here's the problem, fact check the hell out of it. It's their words, not mine. This is not my impression. This is their words.
Now, you have a history of watching companies do things they shouldn't do. So I'm guessing when you see things like this, you're not as surprised as the general public. I mean, because a lot of people think, oh no, that can't be true. These companies are in our interest. They serve us our coffee and they make our sneakers and they make us healthy. There's no way there's any of this. You're just a conspiracy theorist. I mean, but you see this all the time, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and here's the funny thing. Let's make sure we're clear on something. We have a whole bunch of actual criminal conspiracy laws in the United States. We have unfortunately decided that the word conspiracy has to be followed by theory, because that's what the mainstream media has decided. But this is a conspiracy. This is not a theory. You cannot say that you were working on 3 other viruses that have nothing to do with coronavirus, and then suddenly on March the 28th, you suddenly have just this aha moment that there might be, in your words, a deliberate release of beta coronavirus. That's not an accidental, that's not Doc Brown in Back to the Future falling off a toilet and hitting his head and getting the flux capacitor. Somebody told somebody that this was a real scenario that was worth pursuing. And so you can't hide behind who would have seen it coming? Well, the answer is somebody saw it coming.
And it's not like they filed another 1,000 patents that day to cover all sorts of other scenarios. No. It was discrete.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So that was what? So nearly what? 17 months ago.
9 months before allegedly it happened, it happened.
Okay. All right. And so walk us through this. What does that mean? And what does that tell us about this company? And what do we need to know about this company?
Well, so let's go into the history of Moderna a little bit. It's a very interesting company, and it has backed up its Brinks truck full of armed robbers to the Treasury and has been robbing the U.S. taxpayer for a long time. This company, in its 2019 financial statement, said that it had $187 million of grant funding from the federal government and from foundations that had been untapped. This is a company that presented itself as in financial straits, but we find evidence of hundreds of millions of dollars of grant funding coming from places like DARPA and NIH and NIAID and other places, where the company not only is not producing things, but this is the weird thing. Moderna is not a company that has actually had a history of financial success. It's been in the market since 2010 when it started. It started, as you know, with this very interesting alliance between a venture capital firm and a group of researchers in the Northeast here in the US. And they just came together and saw an opportunity to exploit a technology they did not own. And that's a big statement, but listen to why I'm making it. There's a company called Arbutus Therapeutics, and Arbutus has a patent, and the patent number, and you know I'm a stickler for details, so the patent number, for anybody who wants to look at it, 8,058,069, that patent issued to Arbutus is a patent on the lipid nanoparticle technology. And I'll give you a very simple way to think about that. It's a complex term, but think of a lipid nanoparticle as the envelope in which you put the messenger RNA to get into the cell. It's the delivery mechanism for the vaccine compound. And that patent, which was issued to Arbutus on the lipid nanoparticle, which is critical for the Moderna vaccine, was actually not Moderna's to use. So here's a company who in their 130 plus patents have never acknowledged the federal government's support for their research, despite the fact that almost all of it's derived from the federal government. Here's a company that in so doing has violated the federal law over 130 times, because the Bayh-Dole Act, which put in motion the law that said that if you get federal funding, you have to disclose it in your patent applications. They have not complied with that law on any of the applications germane to this vaccine or any of the other 4 that they have candidate trials for. So here's a company who's been compulsively breaking the law. They are not only breaking the law, but they're using someone else's platform technology, the enabling technology, without license. And that's the company that Anthony Fauci picks to be the front runner for the preferred Operation Warp Speed vaccine. You sit there going, well, hold on a minute. Why are all of these funds flowing to a company that has compulsively been an illegal operator for nearly a decade? Anytime that happens, we smell a rat by evidence of the rat droppings, not because we have a hunch about rats.
And whose responsibility is it to discover this and prosecute this, from a legal standpoint?
Well, here's the funny thing. There's a thing called the Federal Acquisitions Regulations, or the FAR. And inside the FAR, there is a requirement for every federal agency to make sure that the companies they work with represent and warrant that they are legally able to produce, manufacture, and sell whatever they're selling to the government. There is no question that the National Institutes of Health, there's no question that DARPA, and there is no question that NIAID has had the ability to look at the evidence and see that this company is violating the law. And despite the evidence being in place since the first patent application that predated the foundation, by the way, of Moderna by about 4 months. So Moderna's first patent exists before Moderna exists. In every one of the subsequent patents, they failed to disclose the federal funding. And as a result, every agency who has given them a contract has been violating contract rules under sections 27 and 52 of the Federal Acquisitions Regulation.
Right. And so that's kind of what this news is about. Since they took some funding from DARPA and these other government institutions, and correct me if I'm wrong, they can't legally produce and distribute this vaccine? Is that
yeah,
it?
So the core problem is that the platform, the envelope in which you deliver the mRNA is a technology they don't own.
And this you recently discovered? Or is this something you've known for a little while?
Well, as you know, and we've talked about this informally, and I've talked about this with Mikki for a long time going into Plandemic. We've been monitoring all of these patent issues since 2003 when coronavirus got started. And so we've monitored every entrant into the field. I mean, if you go back and you look at how many companies in 2003, 4, and 5 filed patents on SARS coronavirus vaccines, many of them not only exist, but many of them were acquired by companies like Crucell, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and others. So the compilation of vaccine patents has been going on with now over 1,400 patents. You heard that number correctly. Over 1,400 patents on SARS-CoV vaccines and vaccine-related technologies. The idea that Moderna is somehow in a unique position to have the right to not only the market, but to have the exclusive advantage of Operation Warp Speed is beyond the pale. This is a $1.4 billion lottery win to bank robbers.
Yeah, you said before that just like, quote unquote, it's a fraud. Basically, why Moderna's been giving this carte blanche endorsement to Anthony Fauci. And you've also said, I think, quote, Moderna enjoys hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, allegiance, and advocacy from Fauci and his NIAID. There's some link there, you think, which is why he fights so hard to give them the funding and is also still pushing for this vaccine. Is that what's unwritten here?
Let's take a little journey into organized crime for a minute. I spent a lot of time working in the Pacific and in Africa with mining companies that love to do what are called bump and dump routines, where they'll pump up a stock, they'll inflate it, they'll bump the market price up, and then usually they have positions on both the buy and the sell side. And you understand this from the capital markets where people short stocks and do all sorts of other things. The fact of the matter is, this company has been playing a very, very poor version of what organized crime has done for a long time, which is, you pretend like you have something, you pitch it, you get emotional investment to start running up the stock price, you start profit taking. And in fact, what you're doing is stealing. You're stealing from the public. Now, the beautiful thing about this kind of theft is that it's done with people in suits, usually at trading desks, and as a result, it doesn't look like a crime, but it is a crime. When Anthony Fauci goes out and starts talking about Gilead Sciences remdesivir or the mRNA vaccine from the producers of kind of the latest, greatest from Moderna, the fact of the matter is he is doing a part of the puzzle which makes that racket work. You pump a thing, you inflate the perceived value of it, and then you profit take while the rest of the market is listening to what's been said, and they're continuing to push the stock price up. Now, the CEO of Moderna has made it abundantly clear that all of their stock sales were, prearranged and pre-ordered. But I'm going to ask you a question. If you went public in 2018, and you didn't have $1.4 billion of new, fresh, non-dilutive money from the Treasury, if you went public in 2018, wouldn't you hold on to your stock because you knew it was going to go up? Because this is not what was in your pro forma. This was not in what was in your S1 filing. You actually got a better deal than you thought you had. So as an executive, if you really believed that the truth of your success was in fact going to live out, you would have canceled your stock orders. You would have canceled those sale orders. But they didn't do that. They let Anthony Fauci pump their stock up, and then they exited, and they're taking money off the table while the rest of the world is being duped.
So as we speak, they're taking money off the table.
No question.
Really? And so that's my next question is, in your opinion, how does this play out? Does this get pumped and dumped and vaccines never appear, and this is just a story of tears for the public investors?
Well, so I think there's a couple scenarios, Brian. I think the one that we know is that Moderna knew about the Arbutus problem. In fact, they knew about it was a big enough problem that they went to the Patent Trial Appeals Board this summer to try to get Arbutus's patent invalidated. Much to their chagrin, it didn't work. And in July, the Patent Trials Appeals Board came back and said, sorry, guys, Arbutus patent really is there and it really does stand. And obviously, they sent the spin machine in motion. Moderna said, well, we think we've got workarounds and we think we've got all that kind of stuff. But their market cap took a 9% hit when people found out that maybe there was trouble brewing. And 9% is a meaningful market cap hit. You know that. Now, imagine what happens in the following scenario. And this is my actual really serious concern. I think Anthony Fauci is going to paint President Trump into a corner. I think President Trump has been pushing very hard to get a vaccine into the hands of therapies around the country and potentially around the world. And I think that Moderna and Anthony Fauci know very good and well everything I'm saying. And I think that there is a reasonable possibility that they did something which this interview is going to spoil. And that's why I'm happy to do this interview. I think it's a real bummer to find out that on or about October, let's say 20 to 30, when the FDA is pressured into approving the vaccine, I think it'd be a real bummer if Arbutus filed an infringement motion to actually block the sale of the technology, thereby making it look like President Trump was an abject failure on the vaccine front. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if Anthony Fauci and Moderna have premeditated an embarrassment.
So they might kill the whole market cap just so Trump doesn't get elected. That could be one of their agendas.
You know, weirder things have happened. And look at who Anthony Fauci has been working with and for. The fact of the matter is, he has been running an antitrust violation collusive practice for the last now 18 years around the industrial complex of coronavirus. And by the way, that's not an allegation, that's a certainty. The definition of antitrust is interlocking directorates. The definition of antitrust is the fact that you price fix solutions. Remember, NIAID is a beneficiary and the buyer because they all report up to the US Department of Health and Human Services. This is the definition of antitrust violations. And Anthony Fauci is the chief architect, the conspirator in chief of price fixing, of manipulation, of interlocking directorates, of seeking foreign aid to interfere with interstate commerce. Everything that's defined under the Sherman and the Clayton Act, Anthony Fauci is the architect of it. So would it be any surprise if a guy who's actively participating in active crimes against the United States also could be manipulated to have an influence on an election? Does that sound like an October surprise that's far-fetched?
Wow. All right, that's deep. And it's, you know, the more I learn about Fauci, the more it boggles my mind, because the reason we have a 2-year term limit on presidents is so things like this can't happen. The only personality that seems to even come close is J. Edgar Hoover, you know, who had all these secret files and control enough to where presidents wouldn't cross him because he was so deep, you know, across 6 administrations, whatever Hoover had. I mean, is that a strange comparison to make with Fauci?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we've seen, Brian, in this entire exercise over the last now going on 10 months is that non-elected officials have unbelievable police state powers, which make them despots. And unfortunately, the elected officials, and more importantly, the electorate, has no ability to influence these people because they are in fact insulated from any sense of accountability. Now, the Department of Justice has a very important opinion letter that says that you are not authorized within the governmental limits of liability, which, as you know, there's a huge amount of sovereign immunity that can be granted to people in public office. But one of the things that you cannot get immunity from is criminal activity. That's why it is so important for us to be unambiguous on the fact that there is an open and shut evidence base of Anthony Fauci's violation of antitrust laws. And the reason that's important is because his partnership with the antitrust litigant in chief, Bill Gates, who spent more of the Justice Department's money than probably anybody else in modern history on actually litigating antitrust violations, the fact that they're working together, the fact that they are on boards together, which is a violation of the law. These are facts. These are not my conjecture. And as a result of that, they do not have immunity from this. There is no immunity if you're breaking the law.
And for people that haven't seen the movie, first of all, go see it. But it kind of goes deep on Bill Gates' entire, career when it comes to battling antitrust with trying to shut down Netscape and a bunch of the practices that Microsoft went through. He's actually probably one of the more well-versed Americans in the corporate world when it comes to beating those cases or fighting those cases.
Absolutely.
And now he's
So is it any wonder that he's using a tool that he knows?
Now, who is supposed to prosecute this crime that you're describing? Or if things go maybe as we hope, who is watching this right now that can say, oh, we're going to go get him? Is that the Department of Justice? Is it another entity, or is it complicated?
So you'll recall from old cases like the tobacco settlement and from a bunch of the environmental litigation of the past 2 or 3 decades, that technically U.S. attorneys, which are a part of the Department of Justice structure, have the ability to bring actions in this kind of realm. The Department of Justice, under Attorney General Barr, has the not only ability, but has the legal responsibility to actually focus in on violations of antitrust that include both the domestic problem we have, which is the interstate commerce issues and all of the interlocking directorates and all that kind of stuff, and the Section 802 domestic terrorism out of the Patriot Act, the domestic terrorism issues. And the reason why I bring that up is very simple. The definition of domestic terrorism includes anyone who takes on actions meant to coerce a population, intimidate a population, and procure from the government advantage. That's actually an act of domestic terror defined under Section 802 of the Patriot Act. There is no question that what has happened is in fact an act of domestic terrorism as the definition sets forth. When Andrew Cuomo gets in front of the camera and says, you're going to have to tell me which 26,000 people aren't going to get ventilators because I need 30,000, he's trying to influence a government. It turns out New York never needed 30,000 ventilators. They never even got close to using all 12,000 that were made available through all kinds of other things, or the 1,200 that they actually had. They never needed 30,000 ventilators. They never had 24,000 people who were deprived access to medical care. But Andrew Cuomo engaged in, by definition, under the Patriot Act, domestic terrorism by seeking to coerce a population and influence a government to take its resources. The fact of the matter is, the Department of Justice and William Barr have a moral and legal obligation, and I would raise the stakes. This is existential to the democracy. This is about whether or not we have separation of powers, or whether, in fact, we can sell 100% of the United States to a corporatocracy, which is violating laws that a century ago were so odious that we passed the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act specifically to make this not happen.
Yeah. And that's why you've said, quote, COVID-19 was a branded campaign of domestic terrorism, unquote.
That's correct.
And that is your point of making this And I just had a flashback to Al Capone. They got him for tax evasion. So if people don't remember, Al Capone, gangster, violating all the prohibition laws, led to a lot of crime, murder, etc. But they didn't get him on any of those charges. They had to get him on tax evasion. So this seems to me to be the David Martin equivalent of that. Am I getting your drift here?
You are exactly where I have been going. This is, at the end of the day, criminals have the ability to do flagrant acts. And the more flagrant, the more incredulous the populace is. We just sit back. Plato talks about this in the Republic. He talks about the fact that if, and I'm going to paraphrase using Eddie Izzard, the British comedian, if you kill one person, it's murder. If you kill two people, it's serial murder. If you kill five, people start going, oh, wow, that's kind of unusual. And you maybe need to be examined under a microscope. But if you kill 1 million people almost celebrate with incredulity. How on earth did you pull that off? And Eddie Izzard does a really cute bit about, do you have a death tea, death breakfast? And he does a really cool sketch about it. But Plato talks about sometimes when crimes get so egregious that the humanity that's inside of all of us sits back and goes, we actually can't believe somebody would have done that. Is it really possible that the Imperial College of London and the Center for Disease Control and the University of Washington and Johns Hopkins University, that those three organizations could actually work together to bring 40 million people into unemployment? Like, that's Stalin-esque, right? We can't even wrap our head around the scale of it. And then the idea that could be architected by a Bill Gates, Dr. Elias operating as the extension of Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci, China Center for Disease Control, interlocking directorate on the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. Can we actually believe that 3 people could have architected this thing? And the answer is, we're told that's too incredible to believe. That's just too incredible to believe. But every single historical account of organized crime, of organized genocide, of organized mass extinctions of populations and livelihoods have always had 2 or 3 people who are their architects.
Let me ask you a question, David. What do you think ultimately are the motivations in this scenario, assume it's true, of a Bill Gates and a Fauci? Do they believe somehow they are doing good? Is this a eugenics play? Is it a money play? Is it a power play? Or is it just what is it?
So I made the statement in Plandemic, and I would say this in echoing that comment all the time. I think that humanity is fundamentally good. I think it's fundamentally not broken. And I think that what happens is that a number of people start making a series of incremental, expedient decisions in the moment without considering the consequence. I think that when Ralph Baric started putting coronaviruses together in his lab in the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, I think he really was just asking some interesting questions about coronavirus. And I think when he figured out he could amplify certain parts of the pathogenicity of those viruses, he thought, I wonder what else you could do with it. And I think each one of the steps that he took and each one of the funding checks that NIAID, Anthony Fauci wrote, each one of them, probably in isolation, Brian, was dangerously close to almost innocent. Where it's just like, oh yeah, that'd be the logical next question you could ask. But nobody ever put a break on the process and said, hey, let's pause for a moment. Let's see where we are. Let's see how many of these little expediencies have led us to a place we shouldn't be, right? When the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 2014 and 15 impanels an ethics committee, which they did, to say, let's allow the Wuhan virus, which was taken from minors who actually had all the COVID symptoms in 2013, right? When the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill Ethics Committee says, yeah, let's go ahead and take that virus and let's combine it with some other coronaviruses and see what happens. Somebody somewhere should have gone, hey guys, The NIH said this was unethical and possibly illegal. Maybe we should not ask the next question of how bad can we make coronavirus? But nobody asked that question because all along, no one was asking the questions. And that's why I say in the film, and that's why I say in this conversation, this is a failure of each and every one of our humanities, where we see the little incremental erosion and we go, well, it's not that big of a deal. But the problem is the cumulative effect of all of those expedient decisions is absolutely horrific. And what we as a population aren't doing. And by the way, part of the reason why I'm so enthusiastic to be on your show is you are the exception. You're getting the word out there. You and Dell and some other folks are getting the word out there that says you can't let ignorance be the defense for it. You know, if you don't care, I get it. But if you don't care because you couldn't have known, that's a problem. So when you have these conversations, that becomes super important. And the question then is, Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates and Ralph Baer, these three people, without question, are in fact violating laws. We absolutely know the laws they're violating. Now, they may have a justification for violating those laws. They may have all kinds of rationales for it. But under the legal structure of the way the law is written, they're violating laws. That's a statement of fact. Now, if they have a supervening moral impulse that says, we're breaking this law because it's in the better interest of humanity, that's a conversation that I'd even be willing to have, right? Because laws change. Social values change. I'm down with that. That's what a democratic process is about. But I can tell you that intent is, in fact, a function of whether or not you have integrity. If you want to tell me that it's time for us to change how we do public health and how we look at the world, let's have an open dialogue about it. But in that open dialogue, let's not lie. Let's not silence opposition. Let's not make sure that anybody who states anything that is even remotely controversial is silenced, because that belies what really is motivating this. Evil needs darkness, and it suffers in the light. And guess what? This is light, and just because of this interview, we screwed up somebody's plans because they were hoping the October surprise would be a surprise. But I just screwed it up.
And just
help me do it.
And so just to finish off on this point and this kind of breaking news, this issue you believe is critical in the next 60 days pre-election, but it could be after the election. And it plays out in a few scenarios. It could be the pump and dump. It could even mean that they actually develop a vaccine and take it on, and who has the financial interests, or it could be used as a, Trojan horse isn't the right word, something, sacrificial lamb to influence the election of a president.
All sorts of things, Brian. And we can have as many, kind of creative thoughts about where we'd go, and they probably have 10 more.
Okay. And if someone should be listening right now, that should be who? Department of Justice, people pressuring their own representatives and senators to look into this. Who are the people that actually need to go do something about this right now?
So the House and Senate Judiciary Committees should have hearings tomorrow. Without question, they should have hearings tomorrow. And they should not just have hearings, they should actually get subpoena power to get into the private communication that exists between the people I've named. Because we need to get to a place where under oath, we find out what was the internal communication that led to the price fixing, that led to the interlocking directorates, and led to the restraint of trade. Those are clear violations of the law. We need to have that subpoena power. The Department of Justice under William Barr should be taking this up and should have tons of resources on it. And specifically the resources they should put on it are the antitrust division of the central part of the Justice Department. Under the DOJ structure, there is a branch of the Department of Justice specifically focused on antitrust, and they have huge criminal remit. They can go after anybody and get any kind of information. They should be lit up like 1,000 Christmas trees right now. And finally, U.S. attorneys in every jurisdiction.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.